So, oops. All right, good morning. We'll do this meditation again. And I get that it's really difficult to generate a sense of gratitude or openness or being inspired if you don't know who these people are. Someone said that yesterday, and it makes total sense. So I thought to just say a few words to inspire you. Everything you learn about in Buddhism, everything with regard to emptiness and selflessness, of course, but also about the mind, how the mind works, how our problems come from within, how we can solve them, recognize them, solve them, etc. All of that explanation is found in something called the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So there are a particular type of sutras, Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And in those sutras, you have the explicit meaning. Explicit used in a slightly different way. So what is obvious, that which is obvious, the direct meaning of those sutras, which is emptiness. And then you have kind of like the hidden meaning of those sutras, which is how to apply the different techniques, or what are the different methods to take you to enlightenment. So this body of teachings, and there's many of them, these Perfection of Wisdom Sutras play a huge part. Of course, the Buddha gave other teachings, but they basically contain everything that's most important. So you probably all know one particular Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, which is exactly very good, the Heart Sutra. That's a shorter version, but then there are much longer versions. So all these beings, the 17 Panditas, they are relevant in preserving the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So Nagarjuna in particular, and with his heart son Aryadeva, Nagarjuna, they had kind of disappeared from India, and so he rediscovered them. He brought them back, if you like. Aryadeva, also being his disciple, he kind of followed on from what Nagarjuna did when he brought them back and explained the meaning. It had gotten, a lot of people didn't understand those sutras any longer, so he explained them. And then so forth. We'll do this in the meditation. So there were those who describe the logic that is important in terms of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. That's like Dignaga and Dharmakriti. Then there are those Gunaprabha, Shakyaprabha that set forth kind of discipline that those who study and practice the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras should follow. Not just ordained people, but also lay people. Okay? So in that sense, you can maybe relate to them a little better. The sense that these important sutras, if we didn't have them, we didn't have the Dharma nowadays. We wouldn't have the Buddha's teachings if they hadn't been preserved. And the thing is, having them itself is not that helpful. I mean, if you read the Heart Sutra, no eye, no ear, no nose, it's like, what? Just say no face. No body. This is a joke as Holmes usually makes. So anyway, it's not obvious, what this is teaching. So unless someone explained exactly what this means and passes it on, we just don't know. Those are just empty words. We may recite them and think, wow, no idea what this is all about. So in that sense, the fact we can learn about these things, the fact we have this, if you find it useful, you may not, okay, then very hard to develop gratitude, but if there's just a little bit that you find helpful and you can take home and you can apply, it's because of the effort of these beings. So maybe that helps a little bit to get a sense, great, thank you. Hope I'll be like you one day, understanding as much as you did. Okay, so with this in mind, let's do the meditation. So now again, in the space in front of you, visualize your own spiritual master, spiritual teacher in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni. So seated on a lotus, sun disk and moon disk, which are supported by a throne that is held up by 8 snow lines. Think that the whole visualization is made of radiant, bright light. It is in the nature of the awakened qualities. The Buddha sits in the full lotus position. His right hand in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the meditation mudra, resting in his lap, holding a begging bowl. He wears the robes of a monk, and with unconditional love and compassion, has his gaze directed at you. And think that it was due to his love and his wisdom that the Buddha taught the different Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And then around the 1st century, there were Nagarjuna and his main disciple Aryadeva. Nagarjuna basically rediscovering these particular sutras and clearly explaining their meaning with what I call his 6 treatises on reasoning, undergoing great hardships during that process. And based on those, Aryadeva composed his 400 verses on the middle way. And then there were the 2 half-brothers in the 4th century, Asanga and Vasubandhu, who based on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras composed commentaries on Buddhist phenomenology and what is samsara and how the mind works, what are the different types of awareness, and so forth. And also visualize the 5th century Dignaga and the 7th century Dharmakriti, who developed Buddhist logic as a tool to understanding the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And then we're visualize the 5th century Buddhapalita, who wrote an important explanation on the explicit meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which is emptiness. And then in the 6th century there was Baba Viveka, who wrote a response to Buddhapalita's commentary in the form of a debate. And then in the 7th century, in response to this important debate, Chandrakirti again clarified the meaning of emptiness in his entry into the middle way. And then there are the 6th century Vimuktisena and the 8th century Haribhatra, who very eloquently described the hidden meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. That is, the different meditations and methods to attaining enlightenment. And finally there were the 7th century Gunaprabha and the 8th century Shakyaprabha, who set forth certain precepts, who set forth a very clear explanation of the ethical conduct of someone studying and meditating the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And finally, there are the 8th century Shantarakshita, Kamalashila, and 2 centuries later the great Atisha, who underwent great hardships, traveling to Tibet and helping to spread and preserve the Buddhist teachings in the land of snow. So it is through the self-sacrifice, the compassion and love of these 17 Panditas, that the Buddhist teachings did not get lost, but that we can still study and internalize them to this present day. So with this visualization in mind, no matter how clear, no matter how unclear, whichever kind of sense you get of these great beings and the Buddha, try to hold this while we do the prayer. First, refuge in bodhicitta, and then the 7 limbs. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits from giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits from giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. On page 16. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. I'm really quite happy that we changed it a little bit, so the questions come towards the end. So please even leave clarifications, because it's really hard to distinguish between questions and clarifications. So do me a favor, I'll make a point, if you could remind me of the question and answer time, to leave like half an hour towards the end. Okay. So towards the end, I leave half an hour for question and answers. So there are things that come up now, if you could note them down, and I'll try my best to address all of them. Okay, so your questions will be answered. But I agree with the people who suggested to not have questions in between. It is quite disruptive. And I actually get quite tired. I feel a session with lots of questions where I need to change direction. I find that much more difficult, and I come home and I'm quite tired. So then I also don't have the same energy the next day. So I think it's better to keep it the way it was suggested. Okay, thank you. All right. Also, as I make you do this here, I keep thinking, well, for some of you, this may still be a little bit weird, this kind of devotional aspect, but say a few things about that. Well, again, it generates joy in the mind. It generates a kind of mind that becomes more receptive to the teachings. It's not some kind of, some kind of worship, if you like, that in any way is important for these beings. I mean, personally, they don't care. I mean, like, we worship them, we don't. There is no ego left. These are incredibly highly realized, if not enlightened beings. So it's really just for our own benefit. It's for our own benefit because we create a karmic connection with these beings through appreciating what they've done, and it's that much easier to understand their explanations. Okay? All right, so I talked about karmic connections, karmic relationships before. That's just one other karmic connection. All right. But returning to wrong and correct consciousnesses. But before I start with this, maybe just to quickly say a few words about what we've so far covered. We've spoken extensively about what is consciousness, what is mind, comparing it to, for instance, with what is brain. And a very common difficulty that we face, in particular if we were raised, with modern sciences, is to distinguish between brain and mind. And that's not surprising. That is not surprising. Why? Because usually in the West, any mental process is referred to as the brain does this, the brain does that, the brain knows, the brain remembers. So it's just a matter of language being used slightly differently. In Buddhism, you talk about any physical happening, anything that happens on a physical basis. So neurons firing away, gray matter, whatever, the brain being active when certain mental processes take place. All that is just the physical. That is described as brain. But there's something more. There is a whole process of perception, of memory, of things appearing, of experience. Now that part is described as the brain. That is the non-material, the non-physical happening. Did you say brain? Yeah. that is the mind. That is the non-physical aspect of the mind. Okay? So experience, etc. Memory is made possible through the brain, but that is just the physical basis that does whatever it does, and then you have memory. So, although they are very much interdependent, we can describe them differently. All right. And so mind, or consciousness, or awareness is an entity that is clear, or luminous, and knowing. So it's almost more of a passive sense that things appear to it, and the mind can actively apprehend them, can know them. So this is in general mind. And as I said before, mind is like an agent, if you like, in the sense like it's an entity that does something. At the very least, as I said, it apprehends things, it experiences things. And things means objects, so it experiences an object. Mind always has an object, some kind of object. And it's through this object appearing that the mind can know it, can experience it. Okay? So the mind, therefore, is an agent that does something with an object. And depending on what the object is and what the mind does with it, we differentiate between different types. Sense, mental, analyzing mind, direct perceiving mind, and so forth. We haven't even gone into all the different types of mind yet. All right, so having said that, then, as I just said, there are different ways of dividing the mind in dependence on what the mind does and what its object is. So the first distinction, or the first categorization I mentioned yesterday was correct mind and wrong mind. And it's quite easy to distinguish because you just need to look at the object. Does the object exist or does it not exist? So in general we say a mind whose object doesn't exist, and and so without, okay, we do talk about, of course, meditative states where we visualize our teacher as one with the Buddha, which of course is not possible. So in Tantra, or tantric visualizations, which the one we did this morning, it's not tantric practice as such, but it's a technique that is taken from the tantric texts. So with regard to those, they're not always realistic, but they're highly effective. You wouldn't call those wrong consciousnesses because we know those are actually not realistic. However, when we don't know, when the mind is not aware, when the mind doesn't know this is non-existent, and the mind nonetheless apprehends or grasps something, that is called a wrong consciousness. So in that case, you can't say the mind knows, because you can't know something that doesn't exist. You can't understand something. You can understand how it appears to you, surely, but to know a flying cow, for instance, or a rabbit horns, doesn't work. Or whatever else. To know this exaggerated version of the person that my anger apprehends, well, that is impossible. So, taking anger, for instance, yesterday we discussed the anger, where the object, we say the object is the person, but really it isn't the person. That is just a way of talking. To be more precise, it is the exaggerated negative version of the person. And yesterday the question arose, well, how do you get from the basic misapprehension of reality, which is from a Buddhist point of view, that's the root of all problems, ignorance, and not just any ignorance or misapprehension, but the misapprehension with regard to the ultimate nature of phenomena. The fact, although in fact phenomena do not exist objectively, independently, in and of themselves, we innately perceive them to exist in that way. And so we perceive everything. First of all, everything appears that way, as if existing in and of itself, independently, and so forth. But on top of that, on top of the appearance, we are fooled by the appearance in the sense, like, since it appears that way, we actively, or our mental consciousness actively apprehends those things to be truly inherently existent, and so forth. And then what the mind does is, it's a mind, it's a type of consciousness, and it's not every mind that does that. We have so many different types of awareness. So they can arise at different types. There's always a mind, there's always consciousness, and very quickly, one after the other, then there's anger, then there's attachment, then there's love, there's compassion. So the mind switches back and forth between different awarenesses becoming active. And so some of those are the misapprehension. And even if that misapprehension, this very basic root misapprehension, is not present, it can still influence us. So here you have the phenomenon of a mind lying dormant. Even if a mind lies dormant, it can still affect us. To give you an example of that, I talked about it yesterday. When you're grieving, maybe the grief is not present at all times, because sometimes you need to make dinner or, talk to someone. So as you're talking, as your mental consciousness is focused on the conversation with this person, the grief may pop up every now and then, but throughout most of the conversation, it probably lies dormant. It lies in the form of a potential. nonetheless, it has a force that affects your general state of mind, such that you feel miserable, you still feel down, etc. So we talk about these awarenesses that can be actively there, and then of course they affect us in a very profound way. But even when they lie dormant, depending on their strength, they can affect us. To give you an example of a positive type of mind, if you do a lot of meditation on love, you start your morning, and this is why we usually do this, we meditate early in the morning because our mind is fresh, our mind is rested, and it is the mind that can actually determine the entire day, depending on how strong it is. So if you start your day with a meditation on love towards all sentient beings, the wish for all sentient beings to find the peace and happiness and satisfaction that they look for, if they generate a very strong mind, where you really deeply feel from within that you wish to bring this about, that mind is only active as long as you meditate. And then when you get up from the meditation to, for instance, prepare breakfast, you need to now use your mental consciousness to look after breakfast, to take care of breakfast, to control your arms and legs, etc. So you don't put too much salt in the egg, etc. So, but during that time, because of this intense love and compassion you meditated on, it lies dormant, but it can still affect your every action. It kind of lingers in the back of your mind, if you like. Every now and then it may even pop up and become active for a few moments to then go back into that kind of latent, dormant state. And it affects all your actions. First of all, for your own benefit, you'll be much happier. A day that started with a meditation on sincere love and compassion, you started off because it gives us, I'm talking about unconditional love, right? Not the kind like, oh, I just love them, I hope they give it back to me, kind of like having expectations. No, the type that you just sincerely wish for others to be happy. That gives you a sense of peace and satisfaction that can last the whole day. But of course also in your interactions with other people, it'll affect that. So you're less likely to explode when someone does something you don't like. You're more likely to put yourself into the other person's shoes, try to understand them, act accordingly. And of course other people pick up on that. Okay? Any type of aggression, they pick up on it. They don't even know they pick up on it. Okay? So there's an act reacting, and so our problems often comes from that. But if you're sincere, if you're driven by that love that lies dormant, the other person feels better understood, feels accepted, doesn't feel threatened, right? And so just in our social interactions, much better, much easier. Okay? And that reinforces your love because you see the good sides of people. So in that way, it lies dormant, it may lie dormant the whole day, and still it's affecting you. Okay? So that's an important idea, hasn't been mentioned yet. But unfortunately, with regard to our misapprehension, the deepest misapprehension of reality, that is also one of those minds that lie dormant. And of course, right now, there's very little we can do to control it. We cannot suppress it. By no means suppress it. You don't want to suppress that mind. You don't want to suppress any mind, in fact. But the only way you can really get rid of that is through understanding how phenomena really exist. So an example for that would be, the classic example is when the monster in a closet. If you believe there's a monster in a closet, right? So how are you going to... This misperception, there's nothing in there, but you believe that there's something there. So it gives rise to fear, it may give rise to aggression, etc. So what do you do against that? Take a sleeping pill? Yeah, well, that may get you through the night, but it doesn't relieve you from your pain and from your misapprehension. Best thing is open it and check. Is it really there? So taking that example, when I say it's a classic example, it's a more Western kind of example, but it works. So you take a torch, that's wisdom, and with that torch, you check out the entire cupboard, right? close it. You check the entire closet. Check, like, is there anything there? Is there anything there? So the same. If there's a sense, there's an inherent I, there's something intrinsically there, well, check. If it's really there, the more you look for it, the clearer it should become. Some people say, well, maybe it exists in a way in which I cannot know it. Well, if you cannot know it, then you wouldn't be attached to it and you wouldn't be governed by its perception all day long, right? So it appears very clearly to us. If it didn't exist, well, if it existed but it was something very hidden, well, we wouldn't be so obsessed with it. We wouldn't know about it. But we're obviously thinking, I, especially in moments when we're terribly embarrassed or when our life is threatened. There's a very strong sense of I. I'm not saying this is not natural, but at least it gives you the opportunity to watch it. Okay? So if I kind of put you on the spot and embarrass you, great opportunity for you to check your I. Okay. Anyway, I won't do that. But if you find yourself in a situation, maybe remember, good opportunity to check my I. But the point is here that we have a sense that things exist in and of themselves. It's not a rational type of mind. It's much more innate. That's hard to recognize for us. So there's a sense, here's I and you are there. Not just that this is relative in relation to me, this is I in relation to Priyanka, I'm others. Not like that. It feels like I'm truly I and you're truly others. Always. You're wrong. From your perspective, you're just wrong. It feels that way, right? And so, since you want happiness and I want happiness, but I'm really I. I'm here and you're there. Your happiness is secondary. You want happiness, I get that. Not really, like I don't really think about you, so you probably want happiness, I get, but you don't have I don't have a full sense of that. And anyway, my happiness is more important. So therefore, tell you the truth. No, my happiness being more important, feeling more important than yours, now I act out of that. Okay? And again, so all my experiences now are governed, are driven by that need to satisfy my happiness. That is different from just wishing to be happy, as opposed to this obsession with no suffering at all. Nothing that I, in any way, I cannot bear anything that threatens my I. Right? Nothing. I mean, I never think about this. It's just an automatic response. You attack me, I attack back. You insult me, I insult back. You give me the greatest happiness, I'll hold on to you. Right? Okay? You have something I want, and I don't think you deserve it, I'm envious. So all these reactions come out of an exaggerated sense of I, an exaggerated sense of the importance of this I, and that exaggerated sense of importance is described as, and there are technical terms for them. I didn't yet mention them yesterday, because I just wanted you to understand the process. But basically the way it's explained is, first you have the basic misapprehension, as I just described, and that gives rise to what is called self-cherishing, or another word is self-centeredness. Rangchinzing in Tibetan. Jepa just means to cherish. To over-cherish, basically, but to cherish or to be self-centered. So, this self-centeredness comes out of the attachment to the I and attachment to my happiness as more important. Now, although we all have the basic misapprehension, but depending on how I can control or not control my self-cherishing, our self-cherishing can be stronger. In some cases stronger, in some cases maybe less strong. So this self-centeredness, this self-cherishing, this attachment to my own happiness, now governs all my actions. Now, if you do something that threatens my self-cherishing, threatens my wish, my innermost goal of bringing happiness to myself, this is the goal of my self-cherishing, if that is threatened, then I look at you as bad. You're bad. But I exaggerate that badness. You're intrinsically bad. And not just are you intrinsically bad, it's not just your action is bad, you are that bad action. So after my self-centeredness, an exaggerating attitude sets in. It's called the inappropriate attitude. Doesn't really help that much, that word, because lots of minds are inappropriate. But in Tibetan it's sumyijigen namdo, so that just literally means that. But I call it the exaggerating mind. That sets in. Because it takes whatever you've done, it's not good or bad in and of itself, it's in relation to what I believe this is creating for me, which is unhappiness, which I'm attached to the separation of unhappiness, I'm attached to my happiness, so therefore in relation to that I call it bad, but now I don't realize that I'm just labeling it. I think you're in and of yourself, you're bad. It's not just me labeling, no, you're bad, and you're really terribly bad. If the same thing you did to my neighbor, I may even call you good. If I don't like my neighbor. And then think, oh, that's a good name. That's a good person because they're really getting at my neighbor. But that's just because of my relationship with the neighbor. But because it threatens me, I label you as bad. And depending on how terrible or how bad I consider your action to be, with regard to myself or my family maybe, right? But that's also part of me. Then very strong sense. You are... Sorry, I keep pointing at you. Not you. Right? But you are bad. You are... And that gives rise to anger. So first you exaggerate, and then out of that, this sense of like, I want to harm this person, or I want to be separated from that person. I want them to disappear. Any kind of aspiration that comes... like a destructive aspiration or a destructive wish coming out of that exaggerated action. So there's exaggeration. You can tell, right? It's totally exaggerated. And what does that lead to? To exaggerated actions, right? And I like the English word, I was mad. I was mad, right? Because you're doing things that are crazy. Out of this anger, you do things that later on we deeply regret because it's exaggerated. Out of an exaggerated perception of myself, an exaggerated perception of my happiness, I have an exaggerated response to your action. That leads to exaggerated emotional response. So the exaggerating attitude is the exaggerated response. And then anger is the exaggerated emotional response, which then governs my speech and my bodily actions. Like, my face is going to be, like if you study, like, I think his name's Paul Ekman, right? So there are these scientists who study micro expressions, and we don't pick up, we don't notice them. I mean, they have learned. Apparently, this Paul Ekman, he's very close to His Holiness. There must be like some kind of TV series, Lie to Me, I think it's called, yes, where the FBI works with gestures. Well, he advised them to do this, because he has learned to interpret micro-expressions. Now, we cannot do that. I cannot tell whether you're lying or not from your face, but subconsciously we pick up on it. And we pick up on whether someone talks to us sincerely or that actually it comes out of aggression. And our response will be similar. It's very difficult to keep it together when you feel the other person boiling inside. Okay. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that it's exaggerated. An exaggerated emotional state that is anger leads to exaggerated actions. And they're never beneficial. Never beneficial. Okay? Likewise with attachment. With attachment it's slightly different, of course, but it's the same exaggeration. So our whole lives are about exaggerated emotions. Those are negative emotions. In fact, I believe every exaggerated emotion has a non-exaggerated counterpart. Okay? So, with regard to anger, I can be critical about a person's action. I can say this was not okay. The action was not okay. In a strong way, in a powerful way. So even compassion can be powerful, can be like, no, this is enough, not more. But when it comes out of the wish to help the other person so that they don't harm themselves with this exaggerated response, I may adopt strong measures like a parent would with their child. When the child does something that harms the child, they love this child unconditionally, and still they would stop the child from harming him or herself. So that would be a strong response where you don't exaggerate. You see the action is negative, but you distinguish the person from the action. I find this so interesting in the media. A person has been very popular, has done great things in this world, and then one action, and that's it. They're out of the game. One action. Right? One action, and everything else is forgotten. That's because we cannot distinguish the person from the action. Any action defines the person. If we find the action horrific, then a sense of anger arises, aggression arises, and the whole person just becomes the action. That is not to say we shouldn't punish the person. I'm not saying the person should not be disciplined. All of this is still the case. I'm just talking about our emotional response. How we go from one extreme to the other. Putting them up on the pedestal and then hating them. Right? That, I think, is a huge issue. It's a huge problem. That leads to black and white kind of perception of the world. Okay? Either they're good or they're bad. It's a lot more complicated than that. Do you want to see as either good or bad? About ourselves, we're like, I'm not my bad actions. Right? We're much better. We don't want to be misunderstood. In fact, we only feel understood when another person approaches us and tells us, well, you have a lot of good qualities, but there's one thing I don't really like. Then we feel understood. Versus, I don't like what you do. Then we feel like, oh, they're just seeing my negative side, and I'm so much more than that. Right? So, it's so important to look at a person, to distinguish between the person and the actions. Okay? The person, as a conventional person, they are not their actions. Because we say those are the person's action. In fact, we use the genitive. Right? The action of the person shows that we distinguish actually, and we should. And of course, everyone has good qualities. Of course, in certain measures, some more, some less. But the thing is, everyone has something lovable. Everyone. The fact that they're also vulnerable and they just want to be happy, they don't want to suffer. Right? And oftentimes what we need to remember that there is no permanent, independent person. So, if they do things, oftentimes it's to do with the conditions around them. How do I know if I were to be exposed by those conditions, I wouldn't be like that? Can I say that for sure? I cannot. We have, of course, a degree of decision. We can make decisions, etc. But oftentimes we cannot. There's certain degrees where we have more freedom and other times we have less freedom. So I think we should consider all that, and then we can sincerely care for others in a similar way we care for ourselves. It's just a matter of understanding. So do not allow ourselves to be driven by this anger, by this exaggeration. So the first step is to recognize it. How our anger in that moment exaggerates and drives us to do things that are extreme. Okay? And to know that this attachment, this kind of mind, this anger or this attachment, they're wrong consciousnesses. Their objects don't exist. Which is another reason for why you cannot expand anger limitlessly. You can't, because it has no grounding in reality. Love does. Everyone deserves to be happy. Everyone deserves to be happy. Don't think that karma means if you've done something, you deserve that. No one deserves to suffer. Because when we act in a certain way, we don't know what kind of suffering it creates. We believe it gives us happiness out of ignorance. Right? If out of not knowing, if you drink from this tap, you get violently sick, you drink it anyway, you don't say to that person, you deserve it, you drank from the wrong tap. No, they don't deserve to get sick. They didn't know better. So they drank from that and they got sick. So no one deserves to suffer. But we do because of our actions. And so therefore, our attachment, our anger, they're unrealistic. Love and compassion, they're realistic. People suffer, and the wish for them to be free from suffering, it makes sense. People want to be happy. They deserve to be happy. They're, in their core, they're just like us. It's just external differences due to different cultures, different upbringing. So in that sense, we can understand that anger and attachment are wrong consciousnesses, and love and compassion are correct ones, realistic ones. Okay? Very, very important idea. It's one of the core ideas in Buddhism. Okay. Now, going back to the text here. Having said all this, I'll just read anger. What anger is. How far did we get last time? How far did I read?
Anger.
I started it. Okay. All right. Now I'll just do it again. It's also induced by ignorance. It focuses on an object that we consider to be a source of displeasure. This source of displeasure can be another sentient being, an unpleasant situation, or a disease, etc. In the case of being angry with another person, that's the main problem. His Holiness even suggested like the anger we experience with an unjust situation, without getting angry with the person, just with the unjust situation, it's not necessarily a problem. It's not disruptive. It's not. It usually gets you to act, like feeling like that's not okay. I need to do something. You never really have hatred towards that situation. You really leave the person out. So mainly anger. The main problem with anger is if it's directed at another person. Thus, it apprehends those with another person. Okay, so it focuses on that person and exaggerates their negative qualities, or it superimposes negative qualities they don't even possess. Thus, it apprehends those exaggerated or superimposed qualities while wanting to harm or be separate from the person. Since the object of engagement of the anger is the exaggerated or superimposed qualities of the person, and since these negative qualities do not exist, those exaggerated ones, anger is a wrong consciousness. Negative ones are there, but they're in and of themselves negative and intrinsic, and they make up the whole person. Well, no, that's unrealistic. Other afflictions, such as arrogance, jealousy, resentment, etc., which will be explained below, are similar to attachment and anger in that they are induced by ignorance, by the basic misapprehension of reality. Furthermore, they are also wrong consciousnesses, since their objects of engagement do not accord with reality. In general, any type of wrong consciousness is dangerous, for it has the potential to cause great harm. For instance, here the wrong sense consciousness, it will be explained below, such as a wrong eye consciousness, can be very harmful if it, for instance, misperceives a red traffic light to be green. We already discussed this yesterday. Or if it perceives a floor that is covered with broken glass to be clean, etc. However, the greatest harm derives from wrong consciousnesses that are afflictive emotions. These emotions, because they're not just like an eye consciousness is not it can be a wrong consciousness, but it's not an emotional. And we are governed by emotions. We are governed by emotions. Have you ever noticed? It's emotional. So even if you say, I'm not an emotional person, you are to a certain degree. When we say a person is not very emotional, we mean like the person doesn't obviously have these emotions, as in like they show like very strong. Like they don't show very strongly. They may be able to keep it at the surface, but they're still there, and it's still emotions that govern their actions. All right. So, the greatest harm derived from wrong consciousnesses that are afflictive emotions or afflictions. For not only can they cause great suffering in this life, but also cause intense misery in future lives. Now, one thing I want to say about future lives. I know, as Westerners, I guess we can say if we were raised with a Western lifestyle, we don't believe in past and future lives. One of the main reasons, not all of us, of course, some have a natural sense, but in general, when I teach, one of the most difficult things to understand is the idea of past and future lives. So for a while I used to avoid it. Now I'm like, no, rub it in. No. I mean, why avoid it? Just because people don't like to hear it. There's very good reason that supports that. And in some cases, in some places in the West now, people kind of take it out of Buddhism. But I say jokingly, it's like, okay, chapati without dough. Chapati without flour. It's like you can't have a chapati without flour. So really, Buddhism doesn't really work. Well, of course, you can take a few techniques that are helpful to live your life, but you cannot have liberation and no past and future lives. You can't have enlightenment. Who's going to be enlightened in one lifetime? And even if you were to be able to get enlightened in one lifetime, what? You work so hard for a few years? Why would you? Right? Why would you work so hard if then everything is over anyway and you're done and gone? You don't know whether you're going to be famous, just because you got enlightened and you inspired others. Don't know. And so the point is, it doesn't make sense. It does not make sense. So, I think it is really, really important to take into consideration the idea past lives are not important. Past lives are only important in the sense that if you understand that they are there, then future lives make sense. So people want to know what they were in their past lives. Oh, what do you care? What do you care? If you were a great person and you're not right now, doesn't matter. If you were a horrible person, you're not right now, doesn't matter. So past is past. Okay? So oftentimes the lamas, people ask them, what was I in my past life? And they're like, don't worry about that. Worry about what you're going to be in the future. Right? That's still ahead. It lies still ahead. Anyway, so what we really need to be concerned with is future lives. Okay. So, assume they exist. Let's assume they exist, because there's a probability they are. They do. I don't know, I sometimes say a 50% chance there are, 50% chance there aren't. I don't know whether it's 50-50, but there's definitely a chance that they exist, because you cannot prove the non-existence. I believe you can prove the existence, but only if your mind is ready, if it has all the ingredients, right, to be able to prove it to you. You have all what's the word for that? The kind of knowledge that you need to make this proof effective. But there's no proof, I don't think there's any proof that establishes that there is no past and future lives. We are so used to it in the West because we believe the brain is the mind, and when we die, the brain is gone, so the past must be gone, so no future lives. That's basically, in a nutshell, that's a lot of the reasonings that people present in opposition to past and future lives. Saying, I don't remember. That's not a good reason. I don't remember what I had for lunch a month ago. Doesn't mean it wasn't there. I don't remember when I was an embryo. I don't remember in my mother's womb, right? Being in there. And just because someone said, yeah, you were there, I know. Well, how do I know I can trust them? So I have no experience of me as a baby, and I still believe I was a baby. So just not remembering is not a good reason. And who knows? Maybe we had memories of our previous life when we were babies. And so just as we forget being a baby, we also don't remember anything of that time, the thoughts we had. So that's not a good reason. Furthermore, what I feel the strongest about is there are basically kind of three possibilities as to what happens after death. One possibility is, and there may be more, but let's just keep it down to three. One possibility is when we die, everything's over. Your brain dies, that's it. You're full unconscious. That is like you're no longer there. You're out of existence. That's one possibility. The second could be the Middle Eastern religions, like the view of like you can go to heaven or you can go to hell, right? I don't know. In Judaism, it's not really heaven and hell as such, right? Is it? Oh, okay. So, all right. So it's similar. Heaven, hell. In Hinduism, is it like that? No, there's rebirth, right? Yeah. So then in Christianity, definitely heaven and hell. In Islam, heaven and hell, paradise or hell. Okay, so very similar. Okay, so two places you can go. So there's kind of an afterlife, but you won't be reborn as a human. And then you have the Buddhist idea, well, you can be reborn as anything, any kind of form of life, and continue to be reborn until you can free yourself. Those are the three possibilities. Now, let's assume you don't know which is what's going to happen of those three, or maybe there's a fourth option, but if you live your life as if your actions will have consequences and you could be reborn again as a human. You just take that as a possibility and live accordingly. It's a win-win situation, no matter what is the case. If there's nothing after death, you just die and it's all over, well, at least you die without regrets, because you live a life according to preparing for your next life. Of course, it's by implication. You live a virtuous kind of life because you want to have a positive outcome. So you don't do upon others that you don't want to be done to yourself, etc. You avoid killing, stealing, lying, and so forth. So when you die, no regrets, and you've been a great example to your kids, if you have any, or to other people. And that's it. So you have full benefit, even if everything's over afterwards. If it's heaven or hell, well, you know where you're going. And if there is future lives, you're well prepared. Right? If after this life there are 10, 20 other lives before you're actually liberated, well, you're prepared. Right? You'll be born into a state where you have new opportunities, as we have in this life. I mean, you are you're some of the few fortunate ones in this world who have the financial means, who have the education, who have the sophistication to come to a place like India, leave everything behind, and learn about Buddhism. How many people couldn't even leave their place of work? How couldn't even leave because they don't know there are other countries, or don't know of the possibilities, or are scared of leaving, or for whatever reason they are stuck where they are and can never go beyond their ordinary, maybe village life, or they're stuck at the New York stock market, busy making more money than they can ever spend, and then one day they die of cancer because it was right. Okay, so we're so fortunate. And to make sure we're fortunate again in the future to continue with this, we need to create the causes right now. So I believe it is very healthy to take into consideration at least the possibility that there's life after death. Because if you don't and you're not prepared, you're in trouble. Right? If you believe there's only today and you don't prepare for tomorrow, obviously you're in trouble. So you don't know whether there's tomorrow. There could be death tomorrow. And still it's good to be prepared. In case. In case you make it until next week. Live accordingly. Right? Okay. I think this is so important. So a lot of people are like, either past and future life or not. If they are not 100% convinced, check it out. But not a good idea. So having said that, however, the greatest harm derives from wrong consciousnesses that are afflictions, for not only can they cause great suffering in this life, but also cause intense misery in future lives. Why? Well, afflictions disturb our peace of mind the moment they manifest in our mental continuum. Right away, we feel unsettled, etc. And subsequently induce harmful actions of body, speech, and mind. Harmful actions of body, speech, and mind. Those are called karma. Okay? Harmful actions. In the case of like a negative action, there are positive ones too. Karma. Well, why? Because any action, body, speech, and mind, leaves a residue in our mind. It leaves something behind. And that eventually ripens in the form of long-term problems and difficulties, sometime in the future. All right. So, therefore, very good reason, just for your own sake, to not be selfish. Like the Dalai Lama says, be wisely selfish. The problem is, we're selfish right now. We can't stop it. So let's not work against our selfishness. Let's work with it. Right? And be wisely selfish. Until we can overcome our selfishness, be wisely selfish. Okay. Please note, and this is something we did yesterday, so it's quite easy. Please note that there's a difference between a mistaken consciousness and a wrong consciousness. A mistaken consciousness is an awareness that is mistaken with respect to its appearing object, whereas a wrong consciousness is an awareness that is mistaken with respect to its object of engagement. Okay? There's a slight difference. Hence, whatever is a mistaken consciousness is not necessarily a wrong consciousness. For instance, an eye consciousness that apprehends a reflection of a face in a mirror is mistaken because its appearing object does not exist. Its appearing object is the reflection of a face being a face. For this eye consciousness, the reflection of a face appears to be a face. At the same time, I should really say a mistaken consciousness in the continuum of someone who knows who has already recognized that a mirror image is not the person. You need a while to get used to it. Even children have to learn that. But once you've known that, then at the same time, this eye consciousness perceiving your face in a mirror is not a wrong consciousness, because its object of engagement, the reflection of a face, exists. Hence, it is able to correctly function with regard to incontrovertibly cognizing the object of engagement, the reflection of a face in a mirror. There's still some debate on that, whether this is really possible for the eye consciousness. The appearance is wrong, and it doesn't actively apprehend it that way. There's still some debate on it, but I believe that would make sense. Because we automatically, every time we look in a mirror, it's automatically there. It always appears as being our face. However, whatever is a wrong consciousness is necessarily also a mistaken consciousness. So, mistaken doesn't have to be wrong, but when it's wrong, it's always mistaken. For instance, an eye consciousness apprehending a reflection of a face in a mirror to be a face. So if it actively apprehends the face to be a face, it is mistaken with respect to both the object of engagement and the appearing object. It is mistaken with respect to the object of engagement because it erroneously apprehends the reflection of a face in a mirror to be a face. It is also mistaken with respect to the appearing object, since the reflection of a face appears to be a face. Hence, it is unable to correctly perceive anything. All right. So here you have it again in this little chart. An awareness that is both a mistaken consciousness and a wrong consciousness is, for instance, the ignorance that apprehends an intrinsically existent I. Likewise, anger, attachment, etc. This is the first case. An awareness that is a mistaken consciousness but not a wrong consciousness. Well, an I consciousness that apprehends a vas, because it's mistaken with regard to the appearance of inherent existence. Right? All of our awarenesses are mistaken with regard to the appearance of inherent existence. An awareness that is a wrong consciousness but not a mistaken consciousness, that doesn't exist. If it's wrong, it's also mistaken because it's wrong with regard to something appearing in a mistaken way. An awareness that is neither a mistaken consciousness nor a wrong consciousness is a meditative equipoise that directly realizes the deepest level of reality, emptiness of intrinsic existence. That's the only mind. When you realize that, there's no appearance of inherent existence. There's a non-dual mind. That's what it's meant in Buddhism with a non-dual mind. No appearance of some inherent, intrinsic, separate existence. Okay? All right. Thus, only the meditative equipoise that directly realizes the deepest level of reality, the lack of intrinsic existence of all phenomena, is a non-mistaken awareness. All other awarenesses are mistaken. Does that make sense? So this difference between the two, mistaken, wrong, if you have some rough sense, I don't expect you to walk home and go, oh yeah, wrong, mistaken. It's a little bit difficult, and we did this for a month, going over it and over it. And at some point it becomes second nature. So the more you think about it, the clearer it gets. All right, so we're done with wrong consciousnesses and wrong and correct consciousnesses. And part of that is, of course, the mistaken and non-mistaken consciousness. Great. When do we take a break usually?
Now or 10:30.
Okay.
Either one.
Let's take it now. Okay? And maybe we can start with questions this time, because we've finished with one. So we just do 15 minutes of question and answer. But I'll also be here if you want to come forward to ask questions privately. You're welcome to. Okay, questions? We'll take 15 minutes of questions. Yes, Felipe?
One clarification, very short, and then a question. Would it be correct to say that there's a common locus between mistaken awareness and a direct knowledge perceiver?
Mistaken awareness and?
Direct knowledge perceiver.
A direct valid perceiver. Sure. So, okay, he's talking about a direct valid perceiver, like a direct mind, such as sense consciousness. We haven't talked about this terminology yet, but like a sense consciousness, that is a direct mind. It validly perceives its object. It's still mistaken with regard to its appearing object, because all our minds are. Right? Which reminds me, sorry, some people came up, I don't think my chart here is good. The second one is definitely confusing. First of all, I'm not saying why an I consciousness that apprehends a vase is a mistaken mind. Well, it's because of the appearance of inherent existence. And to say love, compassion, bodhicitta are mistaken awarenesses, that's also a little incorrect. As in, like, if you have love, like a Buddha's love, compassion, and bodhicitta would not be mistaken. But anyone who's not a Buddha, his or her love, compassion, and bodhicitta would be mistaken. Because unless we are Buddhas, we always have the appearance of inherent existence. It will always appear. So only with regard to objects still appearing to exist inherently, from that perspective we say love and compassion and bodhicitta, they're mistaken. But that doesn't matter, they're mistaken, they're great. They're still extremely helpful. So that mistaken aspect is there. There's a limited aspect to it, or some limitation to it, which of course is removed once you're fully awakened. Does that make sense? Because then you removed whatever is responsible for you to have that appearance of inherent existence. Sorry, Philippe, you still have a further question.
Yeah, so my question is regarding the apprehension of a permanent phenomena by the mind.
Yeah.
How is it that when we posit emptiness, for instance, or the inherent existence of a phenomena, we say if a phenomena were to exist inherently, it could not interact with our perception, it could not function with something, right? Mm-hmm. So a permanent phenomena is something that does not is mutually exclusive from impermanent. So how can an impermanent mind realize a permanent phenomena? Not only in the case of emptiness, but just any mere absence or something like that.
When you say, for instance, that what you just mentioned, when we reflect upon emptiness, there is a very effective way of doing so. Philippe just mentioned it. Hypothetically, if emptiness existed, that would be the absurdity. That's what he just mentioned. So this is a very effective way of reasoning, where you don't just say, oh, emptiness is impossible because of reason A, B, and C. No. You visualize, you say hypothetically, kind of imagine, if emptiness were really possible. If inherent existence were really possible, what would be the fault, the logical absurdity of that? So you do this in the form of a logical consequence, it's called. Like, it would be absurd, this would be, and this would take. So what you just mentioned was, you couldn't think about it, you couldn't take it as an object. Why? Because a mind could not depend on it. Okay? So not because it would be permanent, for instance, or whatever. It would be impossible. Things, if they existed inherently, they'd be totally independent. They could not interact with anything else. They could not interact with the mind. They could not become an object of a mind. That's the reason we say, if inherent existence were possible, if I were inherently existent, I could never change. Because change comes from outside factors, right? And these changing factors allow me to change. And no mind could become a mind perceiving inherent existence, because it would be totally independent. That's the reason. Now, something permanent is different. It exists. It depends on other things, and other things depend on it. So an impermanent mind that perceives a permanent object, it depends, for being an impermanent mind, on the permanent object, and the permanent object depends for its existence on a mind that perceives it. So if the permanent object is still dependent on something, which is a mind, recognizing it. So there you don't have that absurdity that you could not interact with it. Now your question more specifically, if it is permanent, how can an impermanent mind perceive it? What is so difficult? The mind is impermanent because it takes on different objects from moment to moment, right? It sometimes does this, sometimes does that. So, but its ability to know something, that is there in each moment, right? So, it can know absence of Donald Trump on my table.
Can the sense consciousness do that as well? Or is only the mental consciousness which can engage with the
Implicitly, yes. It doesn't appear to the mind, but as I said yesterday, when I know table, my mind naturally negates not table. if you negate not table, your mind also knows not table. And that's permanent. That's permanent. So implicitly, I'm not saying using those words. This is our problem. My mind, my I consciousness knows not. I'm not talking about the words, right? It doesn't use words. It doesn't use... It just directly, it just knows.
It knows that something is absent there.
Not even that. It's not even that. It's not like going, oh, there's something absent. It's not that. If you know vas, you negate not vas, because vas and not vas are direct opposites. You negate not vas. The moment you know vas, you are able to distinguish it from anything that is not vas. So you know vas, therefore you automatically negate not vas. Which means you know not vas. So implicitly, you kind of know something that, although it's permanent, but you understand the meaning of that, which is like knowing vas. So we use words here to explain that, which seems to suggest your I consciousness is thinking, oh, it's a not vas. No, it's not thinking that. It just knows vas and therefore negates not vas automatically. Okay? So it knows something that is permanent, but it's in particular with the sense consciousness, it doesn't think of it, it just knows. Alright? And then even with an impermanent mind such as a mental consciousness, well, no Donald Trump on my table. No Donald Trump. It's just an absence. It's not like from moment to moment this absence of Donald Trump is different. From moment to moment the table changes. From moment to moment Donald Trump changes. But just the absence. No Donald Trump on my table. There's no change. It's not like one moment's a little different than the next. No, it's just an absence. Okay? Yeah. It's a little difficult, but yeah. Anyway. Yes?
2 questions.
Yes.
Is mind permanent or impermanent?
Is mind permanent or impermanent? Is mind permanent or impermanent? What do you think? Impermanent.
Thankfully impermanent.
Thankfully impermanent. Yes. It is impermanent because we can change it. Yes, exactly.
But mind has always been there. The nature is knowing, that's permanent, but it changes momentarily. Isn't it? So it's...
Yes, I know what you mean. So you're saying, but it's always been a mind. It must be permanent with regard to always being a mind. But that's not how we use the word permanent. Of course, I agree with you. That is it's always a mind. But let me ask you one thing. This is a table, right? Tomorrow it's going to be a table, right? So is it permanent from the point of view of being a table? Just as with the mind. But then I ask you, that which makes this a table today, is that the same as that which makes it a table tomorrow? No, because the particles have changed. So we still call it a table, but not even being a table is permanent. Because being a table is slightly different. Also, this table from that table. Just because we both call it table, I wouldn't say that which makes this a table is the same that which makes that a table. Right? So therefore we also don't say those are the same, those are identical because they're both table. They are the same from the point of view of being tables, but they're not the same. So you could say the mind is the same from the point of view of being a mind. But it's not really that they are the same, because what makes one a mind makes the other one, doesn't make the other one a mind, because it's changed in the meantime. Am I making sense? Yeah, we have those debates, but yeah, actually, strictly speaking, you wouldn't say therefore they're permanent. Yes. Yeah, second?
Second question. So mind has existed from beginningless time.
Mm-hmm.
Have we been perceiving inherent existence from beginningless time, or is it turbulent?
Mm-hmm. So her question is, mind has existed since beginningless time. Have we always misperceived inherent existence? Have we always, since that time, have misapprehension of reality? You know, it's really funny. We like to think no. Right? We like to think no. Which then you have stories such as, eat the wrong apple, get kicked out, kind of thing, right? Everything was pure, then you get kicked out, right? There are these stories where it all started. So here in Buddhism, that would be highly problematic to say that we were at some point pure and then became impure. What is the problem with that?
And go back and forth.
Yeah, we would become enlightened and then fall back again. We did it once, why not again? Right? Why would we work towards enlightenment? Because we were enlightened before, became unenlightened. So then if we become enlightened, we could also fall back again. Oh, they might as well stay unenlightened, work so hard to fall back again. Right? So actually, once you are enlightened, you can never fall back from that state. It's a pure state of mind. Your ignorance is just not there. So how does it come from? Out of nothing. It's not like you get infected by ignorance because my neighbor's got it or something. That wouldn't happen. So therefore, the only logical explanation is that ignorance has been with us since beginning this time. But we don't do well with infinity. Right? I mean, come on. We totally accepted pi, but honestly, it doesn't really sit well with us. It's like it goes on endlessly? What do you mean? Right? And so this issue of endlessness, it's a need for us to have things being solid, beginning, end. We crave that. It's our sense of inherent existence. We need exact borders. That's how we see the world. Come on, this is an illusion. As if the table started here and ended there. On a molecular level, you can't tell which are the atoms of the table and which are not the atoms of the table. It's by far solid and clearly defined. And we still love it when it's clearly defined. But the problem of infinity, and I spoke to some people here in private about this, the problem with infinity you have anywhere you go. In any system. For example, in modern science, of course, mathematics, we already have numbers that are infinite. But not just that, if you think of the Big Bang, we like to think, at least in science, there's a beginning, the Big Bang. But the Big Bang, are you saying there was nothing before the Big Bang, and out of nothing you had all these physical aspects? Can you have something physical that arose out of nothing? That doesn't make sense. So whatever physical existed the first moment after the Big Bang, or during the very first moment, it was preceded by something physical before that. That was preceded. So, where's the beginning? Big Bang, sorry. There was something there before, before. Okay, so you have the problem in the physical world. Then you take God, Christianity. Okay, Adam and Eve were first. Okay, the apple and all that. Created by God. But who created God? Has God always existed? Or did God not exist at some point? Okay? Did someone else create God? Whoa, no way. Did God just, there was nothing and suddenly there was God? How did that happen? Right? This incredibly powerful being arose out of nothing? Doesn't make sense. So we have a problem with infinity, whatever you do, there'll always be infinity. Always be. You can't avoid it. And I don't think it's such a problem in general, but it's a problem for our mind. Our mind is not flexible enough, right, to really grasp it. We want it very precise. Beginning, end. But even the present moment. You can't posit a present moment. Where exactly is the present moment? Because you can subdivide each moment again. Right? You can subdivide moments again and again and again. So you can't really find a present moment. And since past and future are dependent on the present, past, present, and future disappear. Whoa. Right? So you can go on endlessly. Whatever there is, there's no precision. There's no actual, there's nothing. When we talk about emptiness, that's part of the whole idea of emptiness. You can't find something precise there. It appears that way, but when you look for it, you don't find anything. Right? So emptiness is notoriously imprecise. Takes you into infinity and all that. And even if you don't think about emptiness, you still have that idea of the mind, etc. So that's just our problem. The problem is our grasping onto inherent existence. That creates the need for solidity and something concrete, and therefore we struggle with this. But we have infinity all around us. Yeah. So our mind too. Yes.
So when we agree on infinity,
yes, yes.
What is the need to call mind impermanent? Mind is impermanent only with relation to time, and the time also evolves.
Very good, very good, very good, very good. Okay, what is the need Yeah, I need to call it impermanent today. No, but you're right. What is the need to call it impermanent? Well, what is time, and how does it relate? I mean, time is relative, like anything. And I'm not talking about Albert Einstein kind of relative. I'm talking about it in a different way. The fact that things change makes time possible. So any kind of change we look around us, like a flower growing into, well, a sprout growing, or a seed growing into a sprout, right? There's a certain process that we can observe all around us, and that change gives rise, based on that, we talk about time, right? It's in relation to, what is time based on? We label time, we say past, present, and future. That is labeled on the base of an object yesterday changing into something today and then tomorrow. Based on that, we talk about also a direction of time. A direction of time. So, people often ask me, once you're a Buddha, does time go backwards? Right? Is time linear? Or is it circular? Circular is a problem. How would that work? I'm a Buddha and I become a sentient being again? Right? So, am I becoming a Buddha and then I go back to being a sentient being and being a Buddha again? Oh, I wouldn't want to go through that circle again and again. It's hard enough to become a Buddha once. So circular or backwards, that would mean you become unenlightened again. That doesn't make sense. So there's definitely, on a conventional level, it certainly moves linear in a fashion this way and not backwards. Based on the fact that phenomena change. So, this change exists. And time is labeled on the basis of that. So, time exists. Time is a conventional phenomenon. Now, I don't know what it's like to be a Buddha. As long as they're sentient beings, there's going to be change, there's going to be samsara, there's going to be everything that we talk about. If everyone is out of samsara, I don't know. But right now, within our reality, and we can only move within this reality, this is the conventional reality. Things change, and because they change, we have times, different times, and they move linear. And it's not talking about being a need or not. This is the basis. There's a basis of invitation on the basis of which we talk about change, time, etc. So we're not talking about a need. We're saying that's what it's like. Right? Okay. And once we become all enlightened, I don't know what's that going to be like, but I don't think we need to worry too much about it. This is like, His Holiness was once asked, what happens when everyone is enlightened at the TCV school? I've said that many times, but it was such a funny response. He said, Judo mebe judo. Does anyone speak Tibetan? Judo mebe judo. Judo mebe judo kind of means, judo means your mind's another person's business. So don't mind someone's business that's not your business. Judo mebe judo. He said it in a friendly way, right? Don't concern yourself with things that you no need to concern yourself with. We're not all enlightened yet, Our mind cannot apprehend that right now. Why do we try to apprehend something that is so totally beyond us? I'm not saying that you did, but just to give you that, right? But I'm saying that there is this conventional level on the basis of which we operate right now. Within that, time is there, change is there. Does that help?
So, no, the concept of emptiness is absolutely clear, but only...
Absolutely clear.
Mind will become complicated.
Well, I don't think it's absolutely clear because otherwise it wouldn't be difficult in the context of mind.
Something which is there from the beginningless time and,
Yes, since beginning.
In context to time, you can, relate to impermanence, and then time also evolves out of mind, and it becomes a little bit.
No, you see. Anyway, it's little. I think you still need to think about emptiness further, because emptiness is just a different perspective. It's not like there was emptiness first and then everything arose out of that. No. It's different. Looking at the same thing from a different perspective. So conventional truth, talking about mind, talking about impermanence and all that, you look at it from one perspective. Emptiness is just another perspective. They're completing each other. So there's no contradiction whatsoever in terms of mind having always existed since beginningless time, changing all the time on one hand, and it lacking inherent existence, which makes it possible for the mind to change.
But if we call mind permanent, will there be a contradiction?
Well, yeah, because then the mind wouldn't be changing. But the mind does change. It would be in contradiction to what we can observe. If the mind were permanent, it would be the same from moment to moment. You couldn't meditate, you couldn't understand emptiness, because you couldn't go from a mind that doesn't understand, and that mind slowly changing into a mind that does understand. Your mind couldn't become enlightened. Either it would already be enlightened, and be stuck in that. It would never be a time when it wasn't, or, because it would be unchanging, or it was never there. Okay? So think of permanence and impermanence a little bit more. And honestly, I don't expect you to... These are the most difficult. Monks and nuns spend 17 to 20 years and have a hard time understanding it, even after that. So, of course, don't expect too much of yourself. So that there's that contradiction that you perceive, that is very natural. Right? But keep thinking about it. Yes.
So that's 20 minutes.
That's 20 minutes. Oof, and there's more arms than before. Ugh. Sorry, I'm not what can I do? Okay. All right. I'll take some questions more. MU, I think you were first.
I think this should be quite quick. I just want to make sure I'm straight on my schools.
Yes.
So for both the Sutra school, following reasoning, and the consequent school, wrong, incorrect, or wrong and mistaken consciousness, they're both 3P, like 3 possibilities.
Okay, that was too fast, and I don't know what are you talking about? Consequences?
In this school, like the Prasangika.
In the Prasangika school. Mm-hmm.
When looking at mistaken and wrong concepts,
yes.
Wrong minds,
yes.
They compare as 3 possibilities.
Oh yeah, but that would be 3 possibilities, as in like when you take a mistaken mind and a wrong consciousness. Whatever is a mistaken mind doesn't have to be a wrong consciousness, but a wrong consciousness must always be a mistaken mind.
Yeah, like
and there's and there's something which is both mistaken and a wrong consciousness, right? Yes, okay.
And then is the same for the like Sutra school, following reasoning?
Yes.
Just the reasons is different.
Yes. So in another philosophical school, other than the Prasangika, they would still say that is the relationship. Whatever is one is necessarily the other. Whatever is the other is not necessarily the one. And there's something which is neither, something that is both. So yes, that's true. So she's asking, there's like a way in which you can check what is the relationship between 2 phenomena. So this is the relationship where one is necessarily the other. For instance, a man is always a human being is not always a man. Whatever is a wrong consciousness is necessarily a mistaken mind. Whatever is a mistaken consciousness, whatever is a mistaken consciousness is not necessarily a wrong consciousness. This is the kind of relationship that you study when you study philosophy. Okay, just to clarify.
So Venerable, this is only in the Prasangika school?
No, this can apply. The Prasangika school is the only school that says we're always mistaken. Always mistaken. You see, in the lower schools, they don't say that. And you can get why it's a little discouraging if you hear, we're always mistaken. So for other schools, when you kind of really go step by step, initially you said, some things you totally get right and some things you don't. And as you go on, you realize the mistake is greater and greater and greater. And then you're always mistaken, basically. The Chittamatra, do they also say you're always mistaken? I guess they would also say that to a certain degree, but the mistake is a different one. So anyway, I don't want to confuse you here. You're not studying the different tenet systems. Some of you have, according to your questions, I can tell. But yes, so this relationship between wrong and mistaken consciousness, they would definitely, also the Sautantrika would accept that. But they are different in that they wouldn't say that every mind is mistaken unless you realize emptiness directly. All the other minds are always mistaken. But we shouldn't worry too much about it. We still get a lot of things right. So there's this mistaken aspect, but the rest of it, just that one mistaken aspect, the rest of it, we still get things right. I mean, come on. Our mind can do amazing things. Okay, great. Who was next? I think Bao was next, yeah.
So I think I have 2 questions. First is, I think, similar to one asked by...
M? Or by the Venerable... What's her name? Children, by children. Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, if reality does not exist independently of us,
then
what warrant do we possess towards the truth value or truthfulness or validity of any statement we might make about the nature of reality? That's the first question. Second one is related to attachment.
Let's first deal with the first question to make sure I don't forget. Okay, so you're asking if everything depends on the mind, is interdependent, so how can we talk about a truth?
Truth value of any statement.
Truth value.
True or false.
Truth or false. Okay, so now how can we distinguish, so it's all dependent on us, it is subjective, how can we say one statement is in accordance with reality and the other one isn't, right? Okay, so the thing is like, just because it depends on our mind, we're not saying we create things randomly. Okay? So this is one of the hardest things to really understand. It depends on the mind, but we don't make up some kind of reality that is just randomly the case. No, what we mean is, for it to exist, the mind must perceive it. For it to exist, the mind must label it. But it is always labeled on the basis of on a correct basis of label, imputation, a valid basis of imputation. So the classic example is a snake, labeling snake on a snake body and labeling a snake on a rope. Now, taking the rope, when you label snake on a rope, can you find anything, any snakeness based on that rope? Can you? If I see a snake, right? There's a coiled rope in a darkened place, and I wrongly believe this is a snake. So my mind labels, ooh, snake. Gosh, I need to be careful, there's a snake. The sense consciousness perceives it wrongly, but we're not here, the sense consciousness doesn't label. But then the mental consciousness, that really, it labels, oh, snake. Just the thought snake, that's the labeling. You might have done that before, but in that moment you labeled snake. Now let me ask you, can that snake be found? Can that snake be found? Somewhere? Can the snake be found on that rope? No, cannot be found. So it's merely the mind labeling. There's no snake to be found other than the mind labeling. Now, let's say there's the snake body, okay? And you label snake. Can that snake be found? No. While labeling. Also cannot be found. But there's a very important difference. In both cases, the mind is just labeling snake. But there's a very important difference. In the first case, you wouldn't call that a snake. It's not okay. Because what we call snake performs a certain function, has a particular basis. Here in this case, the coiled rope is not an actual snake. It's not that which we call snake. So although they're the same, that in both cases, being a snake depends on the mind labeling it, but in one case we can say this is not a snake, and in the other case we can say it's a snake. So you can still distinguish between a correct perception of reality and an incorrect one. It is conventional. We have decided to call a particular being, we have decided as a group of whatever, we have decided basically to call a certain object when it performs a certain function snake. And when you call a rope snake, then that doesn't accord with this way of agreeing. So we can distinguish, therefore, on a conventional level, one is in accordance with reality and one is not. That's how far it goes. In both cases, it depends on the mind, but you can still distinguish between this is a snake and this is not. Does that answer your question? Good. Next question.
Regarding
Negating. Mm-hmm.
So if something is here,
yes,
it ought not to be there.
Something is here, it ought not to be there in the same moment, yes?
In the same moment.
Yes, it can be there an hour later, but yes. Okay.
I ask this in the spirit of knowing, understanding,
yes,
in the spirit of questioning.
Okay.
If you go to CERN,
if you go?
Laboratory CERN.
What?
CERN. Larger.
Can you say that slowly?
It's a machine that tries to create the Big Bang.
CERN.
It's a lab in Europe.
The something collider thing?
Yeah.
Ah, okay, yes. Yeah, okay, when you go there. Okay.
Physics lab.
Yes. The physics lab in Switzerland. Yeah.
So the physicists there would show you a picture
yes,
in which you can see two spots.
Okay.
And those two spots are supposed to be the same particle,
Yes.
one single particle,
Yes.
the same particle,
Yes.
existing in two different places
At the same time.
So what do you make of this?
I just don't even know how it could be the same particle. How could be right particle, left particle? In that way, they're already not identical.
So our cognitive apparatus is not, we don't have the cognitive capacities to visualize such a scenario. But science tells us that this is how
No, I'm not talking, you see, I tell you honestly, a lot of the things that they say has been proven, I just wait like 20 years and then they say, well, actually it wasn't. So I'm not so sure. I have my doubts about this. I'm having my doubts about this. And here I'm not saying we perceive or we don't perceive. I'm just using the kind of logic that I've been trained in. If I say the particle here and the particle there, right, in a different place, just by reason of the fact that it's in a different place, it's not the same. So it may be the same with regard to certain properties, that's okay. But you, by definition, the way you describe it, one here, one there. So it's different, one is here and one is there. Just from the point of view of location, since it's located in a different place, from that point of view, it's different. From the point of view of something else, it's the same, all right. But if there's just one tiny difference between them, that makes them different. So from a Buddhist point of view, they may be the same with regard to many other properties. One tiny difference, that is their location. Because an object is defined by many aspects. Its location, its nature, its characteristics, its causes and conditions. So let's say they're all the same except for the location of that object. Because the location is different, they're different. End of story. Now, I believe the scientists say they're the same from probably a different point of view, and that's fine. I would agree that they're the same from this different point of view. But as I say, the definition of different in Buddhism is if with regard to only a tiniest aspect, they're different. So here it's their placement. One is here, one is there, different.
They can be appearing to be at a different place.
Pardon?
They can be appearing to be at a different place.
They can be appearing?
Just appearing to be at a different place.
Then that's one is a wrong. Then one appearance is wrong. If they can appear at the same time, the question is, do we think they appear at the same time? Because we cannot, it goes so quickly back and forth, and then in that case it's a mistaken mind. Or have we established that this same thing is in different places? From a Buddhist point of view, if that were the case, they really literally are in the same place, same nanosecond, they're in the same place, well, they would be by definition different because their location is a different one.
The circumstances and the environment also has to be the same for them to be the same.
Everything, their location, they have to be identical. Totally identical in every way. So also location has to be identical. And it isn't in that moment. So from a Buddhist perspective, I'm not contradicting their scientific finding. I have a little bit like my doubt, but that's just because I don't know. And also because sometimes people kind of say it's a theory after all. Like it's 100%, 99%, yeah, it seems to be pointing in that direction, but it's not 100% sure yet. So I'm also wondering whether that may change in the future. But assuming it's totally correct, then you have a reason for saying they're the same. That's fine. That would work. But the Buddhist way of applying the terminology of different is in the way I just described. So from a Buddhist point of view, it'd be different. Yeah?
Just to specify on that,
yes,
I think it refers to quantum flashes.
Quantum
flashes.
flashes.
Basically just the normal machine don't see it quick enough. But it's just a kind of circle where the molecules will flash in and out of itself. So it's just going too fast. It's like when we say the mind, it's just not two activities in the same time.
So the machine can't pick up on that.
So, and it's like, yeah, so it's just like its own field, you know, like the moon around the planet, same thing. It's just flashing around itself too quick.
I don't know. I believe you're right. And it's
just
good.
like,
Yeah. Maybe I don't know anything about science, not enough about it, so that would be another explanation. But I guess you two would have to argue. I mean, have to debate with that. Yeah.
No, but also in science, I think smallest particle is an atom, which consists of proton, electron, and neutron.
Okay.
And the neutron was the smallest indivisible particle till a few years
ago.
And now they say that it can be also divided.
It can be even subtler.
Yeah. So atom is same, so that's why he's saying it's the same particle.
Okay.
But a different opinion. But it makes sense from Buddhist perspective.
Okay. All right. Great. Yes.
This is a little bit less theoretical.
Okay.
You mentioned previously about the way that celebrities get dumped, basically, when something happens. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
What would be? I've wondered this for years also. What would be your recommendation on how we treat such people, or how we respond to such?
I mean, when certain celebrities do something that is wrong, I mean, some of what they do is worse than other things. We should distinguish between that. And I think we should watch our own mind, first of all. How am I looking at that person? Am I totally excluding the possibility of them having positive qualities? So I think it's not so much, well, my response, of course, if I have to give a response, if I am in that situation, of course, then it's very important to watch my own mind. Am I really going from one extreme to the other? Okay. So first they're like this great person, and I can't do anything wrong. You know, this is why they use famous people for advertising. Right? They use them because they think, oh, this must be good because this famous person uses them. So because they're good in acting, and because they're famous, therefore, if they use that product, that must be right. So they must be right in all ways. So first to check our mind, are we influenced? Like, that's why they have Richard Gere talk about the situation in Tibet. If he talks about it, people are much more likely to believe it. But why? Why would he be more right than just an ordinary person, right? But that's kind of human psychology. And, or, you know, using them for advertising, using them to speak out for a certain cause. Now, we do that because of that's how it's done. But actually, it doesn't make sense that if they're good at one thing, they're good at everything else. Now, in the positive aspect, it's not such a huge problem because, well, we may be attached to that person when we're around them. We don't want to talk to anyone else. We just want to be talking to them and we want to take a picture with them. And, you know, attachment comes in. But you see, when it's now on the opposite scale, so this is not as bad, but it's on the opposite scale, now they make a mistake. They do something, and of course that doesn't undo all the other things they've done, right? Well, they've done before, but now they express something like a view that is just terrible. It's really like homophobic or whatever it is, something really terrible, okay? Which I would say that's terrible, unacceptable. You are harming so many people in that way. Not just the people who are, for instance, what is a homophobia again? Gays, right? Like, not only gays and lesbians and so forth, you harm them, you harm other people in influencing them, holding those mistaken views, right? So that's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But that is not the whole person, okay? So this person should be disciplined, should be punished, possibly can no longer make movies. All that is okay. I'm just talking about this hatred that may arise in our mind. That is the problem. Okay? So if we say, this is not okay, this is a big problem, those are all the rippling effects on that particular comment, shouldn't be and then act accordingly, then that's fine. But this hatred, and I mean, it destroys that person. And just the other day, there was someone on the news, when he was 16, he made a homophobic comment. And he was in the shooting in this Parkland. Yeah. He was affected by the Parkland shooting. And when he was 16, he made this homophobic comment. He was with his buddies, he made a mistake. He was and now he's 18, and he was admitted to Harvard. But when that came out, that he had said that at 16, he was kicked out of Harvard. I mean, his admission was cancelled. And he was saying, look, I made a mistake. I deeply regret that. I was with my buddies. It got recorded. I've moved on from that, right? And they were saying, Harvard also supported a lot of things in the past, right? And now they've moved on and, they've supported slavery and what have you. I mean, terrible things that they've done. And still, this is a new institution now, and this is different now. And so people look at it differently. So allow me, please see me for who I am. Yeah, I made that comment. It was wrong. I deeply regret it. Just hearing him, I thought, he's got a point there. He's got a point there, right? It's like to generalize. He's done that in the past. He has shown regret. We are all so similar. I want my mistakes to be forgiven. I make so many mistakes. And I have wrong views, and whatever the reasons are, I have wrong views. I've expressed those wrong views, and hopefully I'll be forgiven those wrong views, right? And so I think it's just better for our own psyche, and it's better for everyone involved. Okay? So I'm trying to find a balance here between those two extremes. Like we're too much. Middle way is so important. And I think we need to check our own mind. Do I see the whole picture, or am I only zooming in one thing and just see that? And that's I think is important. To have a vaster perspective. So Buddhism is all about a vaster perspective. Our extreme minds, they zoom into one thing and blow it up. Attachment does that, anger does that. Jealousy does that. They all do that. While love looks at the whole person. It looks at the whole person. They wish to be happy. They deserve to be happy. They have good qualities that I'm rejoicing in. They have negative qualities that I'm accepting, and understanding that they can be changed, that they're only temporary. So in that way, love takes on this approach, taking into consideration interdependence, and in that sense, an acceptance of the person, right? So love and compassion move that way. The afflictive emotions, that way. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think that's, for me, that's one of the most helpful. If I tell you on a daily basis what I practice, I try to practice this. Not much on anything else, really sophisticated, nothing. Just watching my own mind, my own afflictive emotions in every situation. They pop up like mushrooms in the Indian forest during the monsoon, like mushroom here, mushroom there, mushroom everywhere, All the causes and conditions come together. So I never get bored, whoa, I never get bored. My own mind's got so much going on, right? And again, I catch myself reading something about a person, I go like, I should destroy him. Good. I caught myself thinking, when they killed Osama bin Laden, thinking, good. It's like, wait a moment. I've just, right? I mean, this is another human being. So, not that it didn't deserve to be punished, but the fact I rejoiced. I had that moment thinking, well done, they finally caught him. I was, oh my God, that's scary. And I checked, where did this come from? Why did I just saw it as totally negative. And then the other day, there was an interview on the BBC, and someone said there was this ex-jihadi who's now working for MI5 or something. And so now, he does great stuff, etc. But he was with, what's his name? The one I just mentioned. Osama bin Laden. And the reporter was like, so what was he like? And the guy said, he was actually really nice, really friendly. And the reporter was like, are you telling me Osama bin Laden was a nice person? He's like, yeah. I know he did a lot of bad stuff, but when you were around him, he was very soft-spoken, he was kind. Like on a one-to-one basis, he was very friendly. And the reporter was like, well, that cannot be. And he was insisting, he must have been like, he had little horns on his head, and it isn't like that. I thought it was really interesting that he was insisting on that. It didn't mean that he did the most horrific things. Of course he did terrible things. No doubt about it. But that doesn't mean when he was with another person who he saw as his own type, he wasn't friendly. Right? We all have the potential to be friendly, and it was shown in those interactions, but of course he needed to be punished for all the horrific things he did. They were outweighed by that. So you see, to look at the whole picture. And it was so interesting with the reporter trying to get him to say Osama bin Laden was a real jerk. But he wasn't. Okay. To make sure. Yes, Maya?
I just wanted to ask something regarding this, because it's something that,
I contemplated quite a lot because I'm coming from a country that there is a lot of diversity, you know.
Sure.
And so maybe I will take this example, but also, like, in a way, you know, when this person that did the homophobic comment, right, and then Harvard, and got published, and then Harvard said no because this, so then I was wondering if they would say yes because it's such a famous university.
Yeah.
And because of the fact that what he was saying was not okay, the fact that they said no, you know, you can also look at it in that way of
You're
like
right.
making a statement regarding to those things, you know, because maybe perhaps of what's going on in the US, right, with the whole this thing starts to come up again. So it's not his fault necessarily, but because of all the circumstances, maybe that would be okay to say no, because it's a very, very, you know, very large scale in that way.
Okay. Let me just repeat what you're saying. You're right. On a personal level, it doesn't make sense to to condemn such a person. But of course, he's not just one person. His comments can have a huge effect on other people because of the university. If in that case, it would actually potentially harm a lot of people, and he's just one person, then you would choose. I agree with you. So it's very important to always take into consideration not just the one person, but also other people if they're affected. So if in that case it was only he would be affected and what you described wouldn't take place, I don't see a reason for not admitting him and having him apologize. But if what you say is really the case, that later on it comes back to haunt him, as in like other people will say, well, you admitted this person and Harvard is da-da-da-da, then I would say I agree. And of course the problem is we never know.
Exactly.
We never know, okay? But I still think we should really use our judgment to the best ability and use our wisdom to the best ability. And I use this as an example. Maybe it wasn't the best example. I'm just saying if the motivation of those of not admitting him was just because he made that mistake and they didn't think along those lines that you did, then I don't think it was a good reason. If they did take that into consideration, then I think I would agree with him not being admitted.
Because it brings me to a very, very case that was like such a craziness in Israel with this soldier, 18 whatever, that he killed terrorist that was already, you know, in custody, right? And Israel was like completely divided because but he was a terrorist, and even though he shot him, you know, he was terrorist, he was trying to kill other people, and this is why he did it. And the other side was like, no, he shouldn't have done this. They didn't give commands to him. And if he didn't got the command to kill, you don't kill. So there was a trial for him and everything. It was like crazy media, you know. It was in the whole country was in complete this about it. And for me, although I can understand that he was in a war situation and he probably is regretting what he's done or whatever, he shouldn't. Yeah, for me it was for sure jail. And I was like, you know, there was people who was completely fighting with you about it. And for me it was, yeah, he maybe made a mistake and he was 18 and he's a kid, he doesn't understand what he's doing. But because of the fact that he did that and was such a publicity about it, you should condemn him and you should put him in prison and he should be never touching a gun ever in his life.
Right. Yes, okay, so this is the problem, of course, and there will always be difficult situations, especially in Israel. That's very complicated. And I only have one comment on this. I think the media has this incredible need to say one is right and one is wrong. Yeah. And that is so ridiculous, because in that case, there are mistakes made from all sides, and it's much more complicated. And there almost seems to be a need to always say, oh, they are right and those are wrong. And yeah, anyway, that's just our modern world, and we can't change that, but we can change ourselves. We can see, what is my motivation for doing something? And if our motivation is one of true concern for as many people as we can involved, and also wisdom, of course, and to understand there are our limitations, we don't always make the right decisions, but to check our own motivation, I think we're pretty much moving in the right direction. Yeah, but of course it's samsara. In the end, it's still going to be a mess in many places, and we contribute to this mess, unfortunately. Okay, great. Have we covered a lot of the questions? Okay, you're the last one. Please go ahead.
I was just going to ask, for kind of they're believed to be more senses now than 5. like this proprioception, for example, like the innate ability to know where your body is, or the fact that the fluid in your ears helps you balance, would they function in the same way as these sense perceptions, but it just wasn't?
Yeah, I think
explored?
I don't know whether there's a need for another perception, because what you described seems to be part of the body consciousness, which is anyway the most complicated ones, because it goes through the whole. I mean, the whole body serves as the basis for the body consciousness, and so I guess you could just subdivide it in those different aspects that you just described, with the fluid in the ear.
Tactile, that's incorrect. It's body consciousness.
All right, that's tactile. So you talked about the balance in the ear. That's not a perception. That just enables you to keep your balance. It's not a perception as such.
You can feel when
motion.
Pardon?
There's a sense of motion.
Yeah,
there's a sense of.
You have a sense of motion when you're moving.
Okay.
And this happens to happen in the ear. I think it just falls into this bucket of body consciousness. Well, we have a sense of heat.
Yes. Okay.
Whether it's on the outside or whether we swallow something, we can feel heat.
Right. That's right. That's right.
It's not added to 6 and 7 or 8 and elusive senses.
Right. So you would say it's added to the tangible. Yes, because the objects of the body consciousness of, like, there's heat, cold, there is roughness, smoothness, there is pressure, like pressing something. So I think motion could be added the way you just described it.
I think you can't use the word tactile, because I think this actually means touch, doesn't it?
Yeah, because people who have no feeling in their skin still know where their hand is, even with that.
Sometimes I think it's just sometimes incorrectly translated.
Yes.
Because this just means a specific thing.
Right, you're right. I guess it's really hard to find a word. So yes, you say tactile or tangible or something. Tactile consciousness. Oh, right. Then I would agree. The word that could be misleading. It would still be part of the body consciousness. So is motion, the sense of motion, for instance, or direction? Is that what you mean? Like knowing where you're, like, my understanding of, like, balance is like you can keep upright, you know where's up, where's down because of that. So a sense of how do you fit in with the environment, is that kind of...
And how your body, the just proportions, you know innately.
Where it starts and where it ends, kind of idea?
Okay. Paul Ekman, he talks about we have 4 innate fears, and one of them is falling.
Okay. Oh, 4 innate fears, and one of them is falling.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a sense, I guess you could say it's a sense consciousness.
I'll try and look into it. Paul Ekman, I tried to look into balance a little bit and read a little bit more about it. I don't know whether I'll be able to do that in the break, because it may take a little longer, but I'll try and understand it better.
Like a value judgment as well.
Value judgment.
Well, in the sense it's positive or negative, like you can feel when you're falling over.
Well, that's conceptual. That's mental consciousness. Value judgment is conceptual.
You said the sense perceptions have a positive or negative.
Well, pleasant and unpleasant, but that's not a value judgment. I mean, it's like, what I mean is like, oh, this is good, this is bad. No, it's just pleasant or unpleasant. That's it. The value judgment follows from...
Impulse or bring in, rather than...
Not even that.
Okay.
It's like pleasant, and then the mental consciousness goes, want more. Unpleasant, the mental consciousness goes, don't want. So it is not even like and dislike on the level of the sense consciousness. Okay, great. Anyway, we come now. I hope those are some of the main questions. We have 15 minutes left. Is it 15 minutes? Okay. I don't like to read so much. I just can't go reading the whole time. So I'll just kind of explain it a little bit going through this. Okay? So now the same category is sense and mental consciousnesses. So what is this category? It's from the point of view of the object of the mind and the causes that give rise to that awareness. What gives rise to that awareness? So that's important now. Sense consciousnesses, we've already mentioned them, but they can be divided more into 5 sense consciousnesses. You've already heard that. And so they differ with respect to their objects, of course. So we call a consciousness an I consciousness from the point of view of its principal object. So what is the principal object of an I consciousness? Shape and color. Ear consciousness, sound. Nose consciousness, smell. Tongue consciousness, taste. Okay, body consciousness, tactile phenomena. So tactile phenomena and balance. So is there any tactile phenomenon involved in the moment when, I guess there is, there's some object that you perceive or fail to perceive in that moment, and that is here called a tactile object, but it's to be seen whether it really is. Okay, so let me try and understand balance better, and then see whether it fits. Okay, so that keeps open. I'll keep that open. Then the principal objects of engagement of mental consciousnesses are all phenomena. So we distinguish, first of all, there are many reasons for distinguishing between sense consciousnesses and mental consciousnesses. So one reason is their objects. Sense consciousnesses are all limited to a particular sense object, while the mental consciousness can take to mind anything. That's one aspect. Great. Then, also, they differ. That's one distinction. Then the second distinction is with regard to the causes, in dependence on which they manifest, in dependence on which they rise. So what gives rise to a sense consciousness? What gives rise to a mental consciousness? Causes in Buddhism are really, really important. If you don't understand the idea of cause and effect, you cannot understand Buddhism. Right? Very important idea. It seems pretty easy, and it is easy, but who doesn't understand cause and effect just on a course level? Seed gives rise to a sprout. Big deal. But there's so many different causes and their complications. And when you understand that, it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful because it's so liberating. All we need to do is create the right causes, right? To happiness, etc. So there's actually, I think any study on Buddhism, anything you study, cause and effect come in somehow. All right. Anyway, having said so, the 5 sense consciousnesses, they depend on 3 causes. Other causes too. If I say they depend on 3 causes, I'm not saying they don't depend on other causes. But the 3 main causes that are necessary for an I consciousness, for instance, to arise. Now the words that they used, very weird vocabulary. So it's not easy to get used to the vocabulary. The first one is the observed object condition. Some people call it just the focal condition. It's a condition is another word for cause, condition. And in Tibetan it's the word gen. And then you have an observed object, an object that is observed. So this is saying the first one is a condition, a cause or a condition that gives rise to the I consciousness that serves as the object that is observed. Okay? Or the object that the mind focuses on. So the focal object. Some people call it the focal object condition. Why do I use this word? Because it's used in the text all over. Right? I can use a different word, but then when you come across this word in a different book, you may go, wow, is this a different thing? So it's basically saying the observer object condition means the object you observe. That's it. So the object the mind focuses on. What is it in the case of an I consciousness perceiving the table? The table. So the table is a cause for an I consciousness. The table gives rise to the I consciousness. Now, I need to warn you. There's one of you here who pointed this out in another course, and I'm very grateful to her because I kind of forgot that this is the case. In Buddhism, there's one difficulty. We need to get used to this when you learn Buddhism. Well, among many. I can see him smile. It's lovely. I can always see what you're thinking in a way. You always show that on your face. I look at you when I want a reaction. I look at you first. No, you're right. You're so right. So, absolutely right. So there's so many difficulties. But one, definitely a difficulty, is the sense of agency that is conveyed. You said it, right? You said it. I never forgot. That was very good. So it's like when we say a cause, such as a table, it's a cause and it gives rise to a consciousness. Like an agency. Are you kidding me? The table is kind of like, let's create an I consciousness. It kind of seems to suggest that. So we talk about a mind as an agent. Okay, that works. A mind, that's okay. But a table is a cause that performs a function, right? This idea of a table performing a function, the idea of a table being a cause that produces a result. So here there's an agency suggested that seems difficult for us because usually the way I talk in that way seems to suggest it's a person. Right? So that needs some getting used to. And it was interesting when you mentioned that in this other class, there was a Tibetan in the class who came to the class to learn Dharma in English. And then I said to him, I asked him, we discussed it, like, how's that for you as a Tibetan? Because, like, I learned Tibetan in the context of the Dharma. I didn't learn Tibetan first, and I grew up in the Tibetan context and then learned about Buddhism. So for me, it was natural to have that. And he said, yeah, for us Tibetan, it's weird. The way it's expressed in Tibetan, sometimes, they have the same difficulty when you talk about a table creating something. A table performing the function of holding objects. It's like the sense of agency. That is so weird. Am I making sense? The sense of, like, for some people it's harder than for others, but definitely I've come across people like having a problem with this, and when you expressed it, it became clear to me why. The sense of agency. Now, it's actually just a way of speaking. It's not really saying this is a person doing this and this, but of course every object performs a function. It does certain things. It has characteristics. It interacts with other objects. And in order to express that, we're saying it performs the function of, like, a table holds the objects of this. The table holds the objects that are on it. Okay, not with an intention, etc., but it still does that. So we use these words, so don't be confused by that. Just in case you were. In case you weren't, ignore what I just said. All right, so you have a focal object. So the table, for instance, is a cause that gives rise to an I consciousness. Now, not creating it like a person, like it's not like, as I said, like the table is not like creating a vase or like a clay vase by forming it. Not in that way a cause, but still its presence and the fact that the person pays attention to it, that becomes the cause for an I consciousness. All right, because the table being there, it can now be reflected in the retina and give rise to whatever brain activity that takes place, and a moment later gives rise to the I consciousness. Does that make sense? So, therefore, the table is one of the causes that give rise to an I consciousness. If you don't have visual objects, you cannot have an I consciousness. Okay? And we never see the table in the same moment as it exists. It's its cause. So it's a split second. What we see it happens a split second later. So I saw this incredible documentary about again, something that's very supportive of Buddhism, where it talked about, we think we perceive an objective world. We perceive this world around us as it is right now. We're not even correct in terms of time. It said exactly the same thing. What we perceive has happened a split second before us. For the information to be, reflected in the eye and then the brain, whatever it does, right? All this, that's the sense power. All that needs to take place, and only a moment later, perception takes place. And even if that's a nanosecond, it's not simultaneous, right? So it's not exactly simultaneous. I did say we need to see things that are in the present. Here I wasn't that exact about the exact timing, but to be really precise, first is the vase, and a split second later we perceive it, and that vase is no longer there. It's already slightly changed. The atoms have already slightly changed. It's not identical. The previous moment and the moment, or the what we perceive is no longer there in that same way. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So that's the observed object. Condition, that is the object itself. It's the condition or the cause that gives rise to the I consciousness, and it's the object that is observed by that sense consciousness. So what is that in the case of an I consciousness? It's the principal object of engagement of this particular consciousness. It's always the principal object. In the case of an I consciousness apprehending a vase, for instance, the vase is that principal object. That's the principal object of engagement. And it's also the cause of the I consciousness. Why? Because it is in dependence on the vase that the I consciousness is able to take on the aspect of the vase. It appears. The vase appears, and nothing else. So if there weren't a vase, if there wasn't that vase, the appearance of the vase couldn't take place. So it's in dependence on the vase that a vase appears to the mind. Does that make sense? So it's in dependence on the vase that the appearance of the mind takes place. Okay? And you look like you have a big question mark on your face, but you're not allowed to ask. No, I'm kidding, but you're okay.
This is the same as casting its aspect? Is that like the object casts its aspect?
Cast this aspect. Cast its aspect. That's a really weird way. It's kind of like, again, this agency. Number sharva. Number sharva. Number means aspect. Sharva means kind of like arise. Or like arise. Or in English it's often described as, it's kind of like it's throwing its aspect. Number deva. Sometimes I think I've also heard like really like giving that aspect. Again, it seems to suggest agency. Of course, it doesn't actively give an aspect, right? Like the sun doesn't throw its rays towards the earth. It doesn't do that, right? We talk like that. The sun is shining, as if the sun is kind of like, let's shine, right? We talk like that. The sun, but we're so used to it, it doesn't bother us. We wouldn't say, oh, the sun is throwing its rays, unless you write poetry. You wouldn't say, the sun is spreading its rays or its breaths of whatever, radiant waves or what have you, right? We don't talk like that. But really, we're saying that's the function it performs. So we can say the vase throws its aspect. It's really not correct. The vase appears. But sometimes the agency seems to suggest that. So that term is used. It kind of throws its aspect, or in other words, it is responsible for the mind arising. You see, in Buddhism, you always have two sides. You always have two sides. Always. You never have an activity taking place that takes place on its own. Okay? Never. For instance, if I get killed by someone with a knife, that could not happen if I hadn't created the karma. If I hadn't created the karma, I couldn't be killed by a knife. So we always need both parties. I can never receive benefits from the Buddhas unless I was ready to do so. Okay? So, if I say like be inspired by the Buddhas, okay? The Buddhas are already there to basically appear whenever necessary, but I need to be ready for it. I need to have the karma to do so. So you always have two aspects in every case, right? So for an eye consciousness perceiving a vase, you need to have something from the vase. There needs to be a vase. Not saying inherent vase, but there needs to be a conventional vase. So something from the vase, it casts its aspect. Of course, it doesn't literally kind of go, let's cast a little aspect. Just its existence. It's like its aspect is, because it holds its own nature. A vase is a phenomenon. What's the definition of phenomenon? That which holds its own nature. That's me. I'm holding my nature. I'm holding my nature. That's again like casting your aspect. I cast an aspect. I'm holding my nature. Very busy boss, right? No. It's just a way of talking. Right, I'm stressed out being a vase today. Well, I'm casting and holding, right? But we don't have a problem saying it holds its own entity. Hold on, I'm losing something. Right? We kind of talk like that. So likewise, it's casting its aspect. So this vocabulary is used, but of course it doesn't mean it's kind of actively going around doing that. Okay. Right? Okay. So. We have to stop. We have to stop. All right, let's stop now, because otherwise, once I start again, I'll be gone for another clip. Talking about mindfulness. Anyway, thank you very much. So we'll continue on page 11. If you haven't already done that, I keep meaning to tell you, please read in advance. It makes it easier. That much easier if you take the time and read a few pages in advance. Okay, thank you. Enjoy your lunch. Please leave right away. You don't need to wait for me. Oh, I didn't put on the microphone.
No.